For decades, André Rieu has been the heartbeat of a gentler world, the living echo of waltzes that healed broken hearts and made even the lonely believe in joy again. His violin has drifted through the years like a silver thread of light, fragile, tender, and eternal. He once made millions weep beneath the stars of Maastricht, where laughter and tears danced together in the same melody. Yet behind the graceful bow and that familiar smile stands a man who has spent his later years fighting the cruelest battle of all, the battle for balance itself. A hidden illness once stole the ground beneath his feet, turning the stage he loved into a storm he could no longer control. Every performance since has been a quiet war, fought against dizziness, exhaustion, and the haunting fear that one wrong step could end the music forever. Don't look away, for what he endures now may be the most fragile waltz of his life. And if his music has ever lifted you when the world felt heavy, leave a like below, a quiet tribute to the artist who turned pain into melody and silence into love. Some hearts are born with cracks too wide for childhood to fill. André Léon Marie Nicolas Rieu was born on October 1, 1949, in Maastricht, a quiet Dutch city still carrying the faint ache of post-war Europe. Cobblestones that remembered marching boots and church bells that tried to drown the ghosts. His family was respected, comfortable, never poor, but the air inside their home was thinner than love could breathe. His father, André Rieu Sr., a celebrated conductor, could command thunder from an orchestra, yet never one word of affection from his own son. His mother, Katharina, ran their home like a score, with no pauses, precise, spotless, but airless. The Rieu household was one of discipline, not tenderness. Everything was in order, except the human heart. "My parents didn't love me," André would later recall, not in bitterness, but in truth. That's not a feeling. That's a fact. He was one of 6 children, 3 brothers, 2 sisters, each orbiting a man who could make strangers weep, but never his own family laugh. Their meals were quiet, polite, rehearsed. No one raised a voice. No one raised a hand in comfort. His father's perfection was law, his mother's silence its enforcer. As a boy, André would sit alone, mimicking his father's conducting with a pencil for a baton, hoping to be noticed. He never was. When he finally confessed his dream of becoming a musician, not of solemnity, but of joy, his father dismissed it with a single look. In his world, joy was childish, passion unprofessional. That moment left a crack in André's soul that no applause would ever fully heal. "I learned early," he later said, "that approval can be louder than love, but never warmer." At 6, he picked up a violin that felt far too big for his small hands. The bow trembled not from fear, but from hunger. Hunger for warmth, for sound, for a life that could feel alive. Some nights, his fingers stung from the cold, yet he played on, because pain was the only proof he could still feel. The house would fall silent after dinner, his father's footsteps fading down the hall. And in that stillness, André would play to the dark, a quiet boy trying to summon comfort from strings and wood. It wasn't just practice, it was survival. "The violin," he once said, "was my only friend who listened." Even now, he remembers the smell of resin and candlelight, the way the strings vibrated against his ribs like a heartbeat trying to stay alive. He learned early that the body can stand straight while the heart is barely holding on. A truth that would one day echo not only in his music, but in his health, as exhaustion and imbalance shadowed him in later years. When André entered the Royal Conservatory of Brussels in the late 1960s, he found no warmth there either. The halls smelled of varnish and ambition. Technique was worshipped. Emotion was scorned. Teachers praised precision, not passion. "Those were years of invisible bruises," he said softly decades later. "Wounds that don't show, but they shape you." He dreamed of an orchestra that would smile, sway, and celebrate life. And for that dream, his peers mocked him. Some professors told him to grow up, to stop chasing childish fantasies of happiness. But André's quiet rebellion had already begun. He didn't want to change music. He wanted to change what it felt like to be human while listening to it. By the mid-1970s, André's conviction had hardened like steel beneath the softness of his melodies. After years of playing for others, he longed to play for something greater: connection. At 29, in 1978, with no blessing from family, no financial safety net, and no promise of success, he gathered a handful of musicians who still believed that music could heal. In a modest rehearsal space in Maastricht, the Maastricht Salon Orchestra was born, his first quiet act of defiance against centuries of rigid tradition. The early performances were small, the halls drafty, but the laughter in those rooms was real, and that was enough. Beside him stood Marjorie, the woman who believed in him when belief itself felt impossible. Their love faced fierce opposition. His mother refused their marriage, severing the last fragile tie to the home he came from. "It hurt like losing a piece of myself," André later admitted, "but that pain gave me freedom." That wound became the birthplace of his independence. He was no longer a son begging for approval. He was an artist building a world where love could breathe freely. Decades later, when asked if he ever forgave his parents, he smiled sadly and said, "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I simply learned to play through the silence." Those early concerts, in tiny halls and town squares, became the truest expression of who he was. He wasn't performing. He was healing. Each note was a small act of defiance against the coldness he had been born into. "I wasn't born in warmth," he said, "but I chose to create it." And from that choice, André Rieu began to rewrite what classical music could mean, transforming silence into connection, rejection into beauty, and a broken childhood into a legacy that would one day make the whole world dance. By 1987, after years of heartbreak, exhaustion, and rejection, André Rieu stood at the edge of the most daring leap of his life. At 38, when most men were slowing down, he was about to begin again. His hands, those same hands that once trembled in childhood silence, now held a dream fragile enough to break, but strong enough to change everything. He decided to form the Johann Strauss Orchestra with just 12 musicians, a decision many called reckless. The classical elite sneered, dismissing him as a sentimental dreamer chasing an illusion. "He's trying to make classical music smile," they whispered. But André's vision was unshakable. He wanted to free music from the cold marble of tradition, to make it breathe, laugh, and hold people again. "They said I was mad," he would later recall with a weary smile, "but I'd rather go mad with joy than die in perfection." The early years were grueling, far from the glamour audiences now see. Money came in like hesitant applause, never enough to rest, barely enough to continue. Every concert was a gamble, every tour a test of endurance. He poured everything he had into survival, selling, borrowing, repaying, starting over. There were nights he played on stages so cold that his fingers numbed mid-performance. Nights he skipped meals to pay his musicians first. His body began to protest, dizzy spells, trembling hands, a constant ringing in his ears from endless rehearsals. But he refused to stop. There were moments, he said, when the lights swam before my eyes and the floor felt as if it might disappear. But the music kept me standing. On January 1st, 1988, he took the stage for their first major concert. 12 musicians, one fragile hope. The performance soared. The applause was thunderous. Yet when the lights dimmed, he sat backstage, trembling, his hands aching, heart racing, and the ledgers still bleeding red. Applause, he realized, could not feed a dream. Some months, the numbers barely worked. Instruments needed repair, travel costs mounted, and his team relied on him for both art and livelihood. He would walk through freezing streets after shows, coat pulled tight, whispering to himself, just one more concert, one more miracle. In a small hotel room, he once counted coins by lamplight until dawn, his reflection in the window pale and hollow. Sometimes, exhaustion blurred his vision mid-performance, yet his bow never faltered. It trembled, yes, but it never broke. If I fall, he once told himself, let it be on stage. At least, I'll have fallen in music. Under the stage lights, sweat and tears became indistinguishable. His bow shimmered like a lifeline drawn against gravity. And when he smiled through the blur, the audience rose, not for perfection, but for courage. Looking back now, decades later, André recalls those years not as struggle, but as revelation. I don't remember the debts, he said softly, in his 70s. I remember the faces, the people who smiled when I played. That was how I knew it was worth every bruise. Slowly, painfully, the seeds began to bloom. City by city, laughter replaced doubt, and the dream that had once felt impossible began to sing back to him. He didn't know it then, but the imbalance that would one day nearly end his career had already begun. Still, he played on. Because to him, joy was never the absence of suffering. It was what survived it. The applause that once felt empty now sounded like life itself. Not proof of fame, but proof that even the weary can lift others. His body might falter, but his music would never kneel. By the mid-1990s, André Rieu's relentless determination began to bear fruit. But not in the effortless, glittering way some imagine when they hear the words global fame. His ascent was carved from sleepless years, personal debt, and the quiet ache of a man carrying too many dreams on one pair of shoulders. The turning point came in 1995, when his performance of Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2 during a UEFA Champions League match moved a stadium of tens of thousands into stunned silence before erupting into applause that felt almost biblical. Overnight, his music swept across continents. Yet the world did not see the exhaustion behind the smile. That single performance, the one that made him a star, came after nights when he barely slept, haunted by logistics, ticket sales, and the fear that his orchestra might collapse under its own ambition. That night changed my life, he later said, but it also marked the beginning of my greatest test, to keep that light burning without burning myself. From that moment, Rieu's life became a blur of airports, rehearsals, and stages. He and his orchestra carried their waltzes to every corner of the world, from the cobbled plazas of Europe to vast arenas in America, Asia, and Australia. The tours were dazzling, yes, but behind the beauty was an empire that consumed him. He was not just the artist, he was the producer, the financier, the caretaker of more than 100 lives. The responsibility was suffocating. He managed rehearsals, travel, payrolls, insurance, marketing, all while performing each night as if no burden existed. The King of Waltz was not a crown he wore, it was a weight he carried. Each bowstroke on stage was a negotiation with fatigue. Some nights, his vision blurred from exhaustion, the music notes floating like ghosts in the glare of stage lights. Still, he smiled. Still, he played. There were times, he confessed, when I bowed and could barely feel my arms. But the audience gave me their strength back. By the early 2000s, Rieu had built what few musicians in history ever achieved: an independent musical empire. Every element, from recording to promotion to logistics, ran under his watch. He built his own recording studio in Maastricht, his hometown, so he could control every sound without interference. Each decision was a gamble. Some paid off gloriously. Others nearly destroyed him. The scale of his productions ballooned. Hundreds of staff, millions in logistics, tens of thousands of tickets per tour. In 2009, when unexpected cancellations and medical exhaustion struck, the financial loss nearly broke him. More than $15 million vanished in months. But even as the numbers fell, his faith didn't. "I wasn't sleeping," he later said. "I was calculating. Not profit, but how to save everyone who depended on me." His determination became his sickness and his cure. Yet even amid chaos, André never compromised the heart of his vision. His investments told the story of a man who built not for wealth, but for protection. Dozens of properties, over 30 in Maastricht alone, housed his staff, stored instruments, and safeguarded his music. His fleet of trucks carried priceless violins and costumes across borders. His chefs cooked to keep his musicians healthy, and he even built a nursery for the children of his performers. Every decision, every euro spent, was not luxury. It was love, disguised as labor. "My orchestra is my family," he once said, "and you don't abandon family." To the public, he was all sparkle. Chandeliers, gowns, laughter beneath starlight. But behind the curtain were the grueling rehearsals, the fragile body fighting against age and exhaustion, the endless ledgers filled with risk. His smile was real, but it was built on sleepless nights and silent endurance. By the time André Rieu commanded the world stage, his wealth was staggering, an estimated $600 million in net worth, more than 80 properties, and one of the most profitable independent music empires in history. Yet to him, the real triumph was not money, but survival. "People see the beauty," he said softly, "but not the pain behind it. I'm proud of both." He learned that greatness is not the absence of struggle, it is its symphony. Every note he plays now carries the echo of that truth, that behind every dazzling waltz lies a heartbeat that has known fatigue, failure, and faith. His body may have weakened through the years, but his music remains unbowed. Proof that even when the flesh trembles, the spirit can still dance. Among André Rieu's many treasures, none carry the same pulse of life, memory, and fragility as his castle and his 2 Stradivarius violins. To most, they are possessions. To him, they are reflections of the body and soul that carried his music through decades of exhaustion and rebirth. The 15th century castle in Maastricht was more than stone and splendor. It was the place where, as a frail boy, he first sat at a piano and learned that sound could heal. When he finally bought it in 1999, after decades of touring and fatigue, it wasn't a gesture of pride, but of survival. "I wanted a place," he once said, "where my heart could rest while the world kept spinning." Restoring the castle became an act of therapy. Brick by brick, he was rebuilding himself. Every corridor he lit, every garden he revived, seemed to whisper, "You are still here." The castle became more than a home. It became a living body. The glass conservatory filled with sunlight replaced the coldness of hotel rooms. The tropical garden offered air when his lungs felt heavy from endless flights and rehearsals. Inside its walls, he built a recording studio, not just for work, but for refuge. On days when his balance faltered and his strength waned, he would retreat there, bow in hand, letting music pulse through him like medicine. "It's strange," he once reflected, "how silence can heal you and hurt you, all at once." The castle's stillness nursed him back to rhythm when his body could not. Equally sacred were his two Stradivarius violins, one from 1667, another from 1732. Their wood bore the fingerprints of centuries, their tone carried the ghost of history. To Rieu, they were not tools, but extensions of his own heartbeat. "When I hold them," he said, "I feel time breathing." Yet even these treasures became part of his burden. During the dark months of the 2020 pandemic, when the world stopped and silence fell like ash, the weight of responsibility nearly crushed him. Concerts vanished, revenue froze, but his orchestra, his family, still needed him. He considered selling one of the Stradivarius violins to pay their salaries. The thought alone broke him. "It would have been like selling a piece of my soul," he later admitted. But he never did. Somehow, the music endured, even in silence. To outsiders, the castle and violins are symbols of wealth. To André Rieu, they are proof of endurance, of a body and soul that refused to collapse. The castle is where his music still breathes when his lungs grow weak. The violins, where his heart continues to sing when his hands tremble. Together, they are his anatomy, his living pulse turned to sound. And when people ask him what they mean, he only smiles and says, "They remind me that even the finest instruments, like the human heart, must be tuned again and again if you want them to keep singing." The year 2020 brought André Rieu to a kind of silence no stage could prepare him for. A silence so vast, so merciless, it seemed to erase the very rhythm of his heartbeat. For decades, his days had followed a sacred tempo. Rehearsal, travel, ovation, repeat. Every note, every bow stroke had been part of a grand, unstoppable symphony of life. And then, in what felt like one cruel, soundless instant, the music stopped. The pandemic swept across continents like a storm that spared no stage. Every concert vanished from his calendar. Every light in every hall went dark. The man whose violin had once filled cathedrals and stadiums now stood in a world without echo. The applause that had been his pulse for half a century was replaced by the haunting stillness of empty rooms. For a man who had survived exhaustion, loss, and loneliness before, this new stillness felt almost surgical. It cut deeper, quieter. But his first thought was not of himself. It was of the 100 souls whose livelihoods depended on him. The musicians, technicians, drivers, and tailors who had built their lives around his music. As borders closed and ticket sales collapsed, André reached into the reserves he had spent a lifetime building, determined that not a single one of them would be left adrift. Month after month, as the world grew silent, his accounts grew thin. The numbers mocked him at night, lines of red ink that blurred under tired eyes. He sold small pieces of his past, a beloved vintage car, a share of an old investment, quiet sacrifices never spoken aloud. And when the silence grew heavier, he found himself standing before his most cherished companion. his 1732 Stradivarius. For decades it had sung beside him through triumph and heartbreak alike. To imagine selling it was unthinkable, yet he did. "If it would save them," he whispered once, "then maybe it's time." He never sold it, but the fact that he could consider it said more than words ever could. It was not wealth he was losing, it was breath, piece by piece. Inside his castle, the place that had once pulsed with laughter and song, the air turned still. The recording studio lay untouched. Violins slept in their cases, and corridors that had once echoed with music now whispered only with memory. He walked those halls alone, tracing the outlines of the life he had built, hearing in every silence the ghosts of melodies past. Outside, the world trembled in fear. Inside, André Rieu, the man who had once made millions dance, faced his own fragility. He later said softly, "When you are forced to stop, you understand what music truly means. Every note becomes a gift. Every silence, a lesson." In that solitude, he began to compose again. Music slower, deeper, aching with gratitude. The notes were no longer performances. They were prayers. His bow trembled not with fatigue, but with humility. The knowledge that life, like music, can vanish in a breath. When the world finally reopened and he walked onto a stage again after more than a year, the moment felt sacred. The applause that rose to meet him was not thunderous, but tender. 1,000 hearts exhaling together. Some wept openly, their own grief reflected in the lines of his face. Each waltz that night carried the echo of that long silence. The crescendos were softer, the smiles more fragile, every bow stroke a whisper of survival. What stood beneath the lights was no longer just the king of waltz, but a man reborn, one who had walked through fear, through isolation, through the quiet collapse of everything he loved, and found that music, even when silenced, still breathes. And so does he. The cruelest silence a musician can face is not from the audience, but from within his own body. The cruelest silence a musician can face is not from the audience, but from within his own body. By 2010, after decades of sleepless flights and endless tours that blurred into each other, André Rieu met a storm no applause could drown out. A vicious virus invaded his inner ear, stealing his balance like a thief in the night, turning the ground beneath him into a moving sea. The man who had spent his life commanding orchestras now fought to command his own limbs. Concerts, months in the making, fell away one by one. Heartbroken fans wrote from every corner of the world, their letters stacked high with prayers, their words of hope pressed between pages like dried flowers. But behind the curtain, the king of waltz was reduced to a trembling figure gripping the walls of his own home just to stand. Nausea, dizziness, vertigo. Each day a blur of spinning walls and stubborn breath. For a man defined by movement, the forced stillness was torture, a kind of living silence. Nights stretched into dawns. He would pace the dark corridors of his house, bow in hand, whispering, "I must come back. They need me." The rhythm of his steps echoed through the halls like a metronome marking time against despair. There were moments when the room seemed to tilt beneath him, when his own reflection swayed in the window glass, yet he refused to yield. In those sleepless hours, he learned that healing was not a miracle, but an act of endurance, measured one trembling breath at a time. The years that followed brought recovery, and a heartbreak that no medicine could mend. In 2016, just as his body found balance again, fate struck from another direction. Ruud Merckx, his dearest friend and trombonist, collapsed without warning mid-tour. One day, laughter filled their small dressing room. The next, silence. André took the stage that night as always, but the lights burned colder, the applause rang hollow, and the music trembled with absence. Each note became a plea to heaven, each waltz an elegy. It was like losing a limb, he confessed later, his voice cracking under the memory. On stage, he began leaving a single bar of silence, never announced, never explained, but always for Rude. In that fragile pause between notes, he kept his friend alive. Pain became his prayer, loss his rhythm, and love his endurance. By 2024, decades of pushing past exhaustion and gravity exacted their price. In Mexico, under a searing sky, 40,000 hearts waited beyond the curtain. He raised his bow, ready to give them everything once again. And then the world tilted. A burst of light, a hollow ringing in his ears, and the floor rushed up to meet him. The roar of the crowd melted into a distant hum. Stagehands screamed. Paramedics swarmed through the wings, their flashlights cutting through the gold haze of the stage. The warm glow of performance turned sterile white as they lifted him onto a stretcher. His breathing came shallow, the world shrinking to the sound of heart monitors and Marjorie's trembling voice beside him. "I don't ever want another opening night like this," he whispered, eyes glassy beneath the glare. That night, in a dark hotel room, he lay motionless, the silence pressing against his chest like a weight. The phone on the bedside table blinked with dozens of messages, fans, friends, family, unanswered. He stared at the ceiling, counting the slow rhythm of his own pulse, wondering if the curtain had already fallen for good. When dawn finally came, its light cut softly through the window, and he chose to rise with it. Recovery this time was brutal. His doctors warned him, every year the body heals a little slower. Yet he fought back, inch by inch. He trained his hands to steady, his legs to stand, his will to outlast the spinning world. Some days, he practiced only for minutes before the dizziness returned. Others, he would push through tears to finish a single phrase. Each performance afterward became a negotiation with pain. Every bow stroke a quiet duel with time. Before every concert, he would look to the empty space where Rude once stood and whisper, "Help me stand, old friend." His tours grew shorter, his rehearsals gentler, but the fire within him never dimmed. He learned to measure success not in ticket sales, but in breath, the miracle of simply being able to play. He knew now what few ever learn, that the body may falter, but the spirit still sings. His waltzes grew slower, softer, more human, not in surrender, but in defiance. Each bow stroke pulsed like a heartbeat. Each applause felt like oxygen returning to weary lungs. And as he stood once more beneath the lights, trembling hands steadying the violin, he understood at last that the truest music he had ever made was not of strings, nor of fame, but of survival itself. For more than half a century, Marjorie has been the unshakable anchor of André Rieu's extraordinary life. The quiet architect behind the empire, the calm behind the curtain. While the world saw the glitter of waltzes and golden lights, she was the pulse that kept the music alive when fatigue and fear crept too close. She managed every schedule, every tour, every fragile moment of his health with the precision of love disguised as duty. It was she who negotiated contracts, revised arrangements, and balanced ledgers long after midnight. Not for glory, but to protect the man whose heart beat in rhythm with his violin. Through decades of sleepless flights, financial storms, and the haunting stillness of the pandemic, she never wavered. Marjorie saved my life more times than music ever did, André once admitted quietly. She believed when I couldn't. Their son, Pierre, grew up backstage, falling asleep to the hum of tuning strings and the low murmur of rehearsals. He learned early that greatness is not glamour, it is grit. Today, he stands as the vigilant guardian of his father's legacy, orchestrating every detail, the lighting, the tempo, even the moments of rest, to protect the body that once carried entire symphonies on its shoulders. He has seen what no audience ever sees. The trembling of André's bow hand after a 2-hour concert, the slow descent of exhaustion behind a triumphant smile. When the applause fades, Pierre once said, that's when my real job begins, making sure my father wakes up to another sunrise strong enough to play. And then there is Daisy, André's granddaughter, whose tiny fingers dance across piano keys with the same quiet wonder that once lived in his 6-year-old hands. Her laughter fills the halls where once there was only discipline. She is the embodiment of the family's creed. We never force them. If music chooses them, they will come. To André, Daisy is not just a child. She is living proof that beauty survives us. Watching her play, he once whispered, "It's as if the music has found a new body to live in." Today, in November 2025, André Rieu resides in his 150-year-old home near his cherished 15th-century castle, the place where a boy once reached for a piano key and found destiny. The castle remains alive with music, its stone walls now softer with memory, but his home has become his sanctuary, a place where silence heals rather than haunts. The rhythm of his days has slowed. Dawn walks in the misty gardens, light stretching guided by his trainer, herbal teas instead of champagne, and meals carefully balanced by his doctor and chef to preserve the fragile stamina that age and history have claimed. In the afternoons, he retreats to his studio, sometimes playing for hours, sometimes just touching the violin as if in conversation with an old friend. Evenings are for Marjorie, Pierre, and Daisy. Quiet dinners, soft laughter, and the comfort of being surrounded by love rather than applause. Though he has not spoken publicly of a will, his family already understands what his truest inheritance will be. It is not his vast fortune, nor the castle, nor the priceless Stradivarius violins. It is his life itself. The courage to create warmth where none was given. The discipline to keep faith when the body faltered. The resilience to play on when silence threatened to swallow everything. His net worth may be measured in hundreds of millions, but his real wealth lies in millions of hearts that beat a little steadier when they hear his waltzes. The echoes of his July 2025 Maastricht concerts still linger in the air, a symphony of gratitude and survival. Thousands stood together that night under the summer sky, tears glistening in the crowd as the final note faded into the stars. "I am still here," he whispered backstage afterward. And so is the music. Now, in early November 2025, André plays fewer notes, but each carries the weight of a lifetime. His health, though more fragile, is no longer an enemy but a teacher. Every breath he draws, every bow he raises, is a quiet defiance of time. He knows the curtain will fall someday, but not yet. Not while his heart still beats in waltz time. Because in the end, André Rieu's true legacy is not measured in applause or awards, but in the unseen lives he has lifted. The widower who smiled again. The lonely who felt less alone. The aging who found courage to keep dancing. His life reminds us that the truest music is not what we hear, but what we feel. The will to keep breathing, to keep loving, to keep believing in beauty no matter how heavy the years become. If André's melodies have ever carried you through grief or brought you back to joy, leave your tribute below. Even a single word of gratitude is a note in his eternal symphony. And as you listen tonight, remember this: no matter where you are, no matter how tired your heart feels, there is still music left in you. May you live your own waltz, in health, in peace, and in the quiet wealth of a life well loved.